Today I'm surrounded in one of the fastest fruit-bearing trees that you'll come across. This is the incredible Tamarillo. These trees can start producing these awesome looking fruits at just 1.5 to 2 years from seed, and that's less time than it takes most trees to even settle in. Meanwhile, these Tamarillos are already rewarding me with a pretty awesome harvest. Plus, if you rub the leaves and give it a smell, it smells kind of like popcorn. It's very pungent, but also somewhat addicting. Anyway, let's dive into the interesting things to know about these trees, as well as how to grow them, and then we'll go through and taste all the different coloured varieties that I've got here. Okay, so what are Tamarillos? Well, these are a fruit native to South America, and over there they're commonly known as tomate de árbol, which translates to tree tomato, and these are actually related to tomatoes and potatoes and eggplants, those other members in the nightshade family. And there's a bit of a weird story when it comes to their name, because these used to just be called tree tomatoes, but back in the 60s they decided that they wanted to give them a new name to increase their exotic appeal and make sure that people didn't confuse them with regular tomatoes. So over here in New Zealand actually, they came up with a new name for them, Tamarillo, claiming that it sounded like a mixture of Māori and Spanish words. But it kind of makes me question the way that everyone seems to pronounce this, because everyone that I've ever heard has called these Tamarillos. And even when you look online at the pronunciation, you would find Tamarillo. But if it was from Māori and Spanish words, then it really should be Tamarillo. Tama being the Māori part of the word, and then Rio would have to be the Spanish kind of influence because there's no L's in the Māori dictionary. So Tamarillo seems like maybe what they intended, but maybe Tamarillo is just what stuck with English speakers. What do you guys reckon? So you guys definitely would have noticed that I've got different coloured varieties of these Tamarillos, Tamarillos growing here, and these are the bright gold ones. There's also some bright red ones that have a bit of orange in them, and then these deep purple coloured ones that will actually ripen to a red colour. But we'll talk more about the varieties later on when we go through the tasting, because there's some interesting taste differences as well as the way they look inside. But first, let's get into how to grow these, because they are quite a sensitive tree and there's some pretty important stuff to know. So you can see that I've got these trees planted up against my house here, and I've done that just to try and give them a bit of extra protection, because these are a subtropical tree. They don't like frost and they don't like wind either, and also giving them protection from too much extreme sun is also a good idea, I've found. And overall they have really enjoyed growing in this spot. They've been growing really well and looking nice and healthy. Only about like a month ago they were looking super lush with nice leaves, and these are east facing, so they get the morning sun and then a bit of shade from that hot afternoon sun. But right now they're looking pretty battered and pretty bruised, and that's because only about a week ago we had around 4 or 5 really quite strong frosts for this time of year, and basically froze a lot of the leaves, causing them to turn black and die. And since then, a couple of days ago, we had a really big storm. The plants were just getting absolutely thrashed around all night. There was a lot of rain as well, and it caused all of those frost damaged leaves to fall off. So that's why the trees are not looking so good despite my efforts to try and protect them. But one good thing about these is that they have a pretty strong attachment of the fruit to the tree. So they were getting just thrashed around so much, but despite that, only about 4 or 5 fruits were actually on the ground the next morning. And while the house did provide some good protection to those Tamarillos over that end, there is this one here out of my food forest, which actually did very well, surprisingly well, considering this one seems even more exposed. The good thing about this one is that it's got protection from this tree that's above it. This is a tree lucerne, also known as a Tagesesti tree, and it's a nitrogen fixing tree. It grows really quickly and provides quite a good amount of protection, but also lets through the light and gives this some nice dappled shade to grow in. There is of course some frost damage here, but it's basically stopped the frost from kind of coming downward and settling on the tree as easily. And as well as that, it's stopping the wind from smashing it around as much, plus the surrounding food forest kind of creates a little bit more of a protected zone for this little subtropical tree trying to grow out here in the frost. You can see with this particular tree here that the fruits are quite a way away from ripening. They're way behind the other trees, and that's because back in the springtime when this was covered in flowers doing really well, there was a big storm that came through and actually snapped all the branches off. I was quite gutted because all that I was left with was just a trunk. So I just cut the top off cleanly, and because we were in the growing season, it grew all of these new branches back really quickly. It then flowered and started producing these fruits all in that one season. So it does show how resilient these trees can be. Even if they do snap off, then in most cases they will grow back if the weather conditions are good. And it also shows that depending on when you prune your plant will also depend on when it fruits. So if you prune them nice and early, you'll get earlier fruit, whereas if you prune them a bit later, then your harvest is likely to be a bit delayed, which can be a potential good thing if you want to spread out your harvest. One thing that I'll do with all these trees once the risk of the frost is past and we're in springtime and before they start flowering is I'll cut the plants back quite hard, and that will mean that all the new growth will be a lot closer to the trunk of the tree, and that's where the flowers and the fruits are going to form. So you're going to end up with a stronger tree. Whereas if I didn't prune the plant and let these continue to grow, it's going to even go further out from the trunk, and then new fruits are going to form way away, and that's going to make it a lot easier for the plant to snap off from the weight of the fruit and from any wind and things like that. So yeah, pruning can be quite a good way to make sure that you have a stronger tree that's going to be a little bit more resilient to wind. So these trees do have quite shallow root systems and they can be susceptible to rot. So it's a good idea to plant them in well-drained soil, a nice light soil that's rich in organic matter. So this is a built-up garden, so I ended up just filling it with a mixture of topsoil and compost, and the trees have really liked that because it can drain away and it's got some good nutrients in there as well. And I've also put this nice mulch layer around them. That's protecting those shallow roots from temperature extremes, from hot and cold, stopping the weeds growing as well, keeping the moisture in and feeding the tree over time. I've also planted some other plants around, like this pepino here. There's a little fruit growing, and fuchsia. This actually has some little fuchsia berries on it, which are ripe. They're not that tasty, but kind of cool. That one was actually kind of sweet. And then a monstera growing behind me here with some flowers and fruits on it too. So yeah, it's nice to grow some other things below it, but give them a nice well-drained soil and they should do pretty well for you. You can grow these from cuttings, but they also grow really easily and quickly from seed. So let me show you how to do that. For growing Tamarillo, I just put a bit of the seeds through a sieve to clean them off as best as I can. It doesn't really clean them off very well, but that's totally fine. And then I just dry the seeds off on a paper towel or baking paper. Now I'm just taking the seeds and sprinkling them onto some moist soil, lightly covering them, and then placing them somewhere warm. And again, I'm just covering these with a plastic lid to keep the moisture and warmth in. After 5 weeks, they're looking nice and healthy, and we seem to have had a good germination rate as well, which is awesome. So now's a good time to transplant these into their own pots. And it's a bit like tomatoes, where it's best to handle them from their leaves as opposed to holding the really fragile stem. At 3.5 months old, these have developed some good root systems, so I decided to upsize the pots again, and I'm just using a good quality potting mix and putting a bit of mulch on the top to protect the surface roots because these are quite drought sensitive plants. So I'll just keep growing these until I can plant them in the ground, and I have been regularly blasting the leaves with water to remove the whitefly, which are sometimes quite attracted to these. So they're not very long-lived trees. They can live up to around 12 or so years, but even then they would have to be really good conditions and the trees would have to be well cared for, but otherwise they can live much shorter than that as well. So one thing that I'm doing is just planting a couple of new trees each year, but like in a small home garden, you might just consider putting in a new tree every few years or something like that, just to always have like a replacement coming up in case the older one dies or something happens. This one here I actually planted late summer, which is not ideal. It's better to plant them in the springtime, so they've got all summer to grow to a bigger and stronger size. But despite that, so far there's no damage at all on it because it's in a nice protected area in the food forest with some overhead protection. So yeah, fingers crossed I can get this through, and then yeah, in the springtime it should hopefully take off. Anyway, let's harvest some of these for the taste test. So there's a few ways to tell when these are ripe. The first way is by colour. So you can see these two have a very different colour. This one is more purpley and it will ripen to this darker red. Also, you can kind of feel the ones that are more ripe because they have a slightly softer feel to them. Not much, but you can start to tell. And then also, if you look at the stem of these Tamarillos, once the stem goes from a green to more of a yellowy colour, that is even further ripe because these don't even pull off on their own, so they could still stay on there for a bit longer. See how these ones have more of a browning of the stem and they've developed a nice colour and softness, but again they still hold on. Oh, there we go, that one just came off, so yeah, he's a very ripe one, and this one as well, there we go. And if you do pick these, you can also just carefully snip them off, and even if they're not completely ripe, they will continue to ripen on your bench top. Check out this fruit I just harvested. It's like one stalk, but 2 fruits growing on it. It's crazy. And it kind of looks like something, so it's kind of giving me a bit of an idea, which we'll talk about soon. Alright, I am pretty excited to try these. I'm very hungry, so let's get into it. We've got these large red ones to try, these smaller red ones, which have quite a different taste to these, and then these bright sort of orangey gold ones. So we'll start off with these large ones because these are quite typical of what you would find at the supermarket. This particular variety is called Ted's Red, and these are amazing to eat fresh, that's how I like them, but you can use them in many different things. They're very versatile fruits in both sweet and savoury dishes. So for example, savoury dishes would be things like salsa or salad or chutneys or even things like soup. For sweet dishes, they're great in desserts or in fruit salad, or you can put them on your cereal with yogurt, and they're even great in cakes. And this is an upside down Tamarillo cake that I made, and that was actually pretty tasty. I'm just going to cut it this way. The inside of these is just stunning. They've got that bright orange flesh, and then the seeds have almost a blood red colour to them. So I'm just going to scoop this out with a spoon. But another way that you can actually do this is by blanching the whole fruit in boiling water for around 30 seconds, and then just transfer it into ice water. And if you put a little slice in it, then that paper thin skin should just peel right off, leaving you with the maximum amount of fruit for your cooking or your baking or putting on things like desserts. Here we go. Ooh, these are pretty tart, and that's what you'll find, even with the ones at the supermarket. A slight tomatoey flavour, but there's kind of a lot of fruitiness to it. So it's got that real tartness and other kind of like soury sort of notes to it, but it is a lot more like eating a fruit than eating a tomato, even though a tomato is of course a fruit, but you know what I mean. And I would say that they are quite an acquired taste because people will often start with eating these ones because that's what you'd typically find at the supermarket. You wouldn't really find these ones at all. That's why some people kind of get turned off by them because of that tanginess they can't really handle or they don't particularly like. But yeah, stick with them and try these other ones if you're not a fan of these. But I actually do quite enjoy them. They do give a nice tanginess and a nice sort of sour, zingy flavour to them. Very fruity. Okay, so the variety of the smaller red one is called Tango, and this is a low acidity variety, so hopefully should be much sweeter than the other one. And this one actually looks like it's quite ripe, and that's something I wanted to mention because what I've found is that Tamarillos are one of the only fruits that I can eat when they're kind of overripe, because other fruits I can't handle when they go like too sweet and the texture's not right. But with these ones, they still have quite a nice tang to them and the texture's not really affected. They're still very refreshing and nice and good to eat. So yeah, that's kind of good to know and quite helpful. So here we go. These are delicious. They are way sweeter than these ones. They have an almost less complex flavor though, because although these ones have a good sharpness to them, they have a lot more sort of like fruity, bright flavors, whereas this one is definitely more mellowed, but it is more sweet as well. So there's kind of a bit of a difference in that way as well, but they're a very tasty fruit, and you can actually eat quite close to the skin as well, especially if you've got like a grapefruit spoon that has the serrated parts, and yeah, scoop it right out close to the skin and make the most of it. And it's quite good because for me these come ready after the feijoas are finished fruiting and before the citrus start coming ripe, so yeah, they fill in that gap nicely. Alright, onto these golden ones now, and this variety is called Bold Gold, and whenever I get people to try these three varieties, everyone seems to agree that these are their favourite ones. Let's see the inside. Oh wow, oh stunning. These are just such cool looking fruits, like such a vibrant colour and such a cool pattern. So cool they're even just casually grown in my garden. And these fruits are very low calorie fruits too. They're very high in vitamin C, vitamin A, potassium and antioxidants too. So they're great for your immune system and heart health and your digestion too. But anyway, let's try it. Smells so tropical and so fruity. Oh, that is really good. I would say that's also my favorite. It has a much kind of like fruitier feel to it. It's got that tang but also sweetness in there as well. They're quite sweet, and it almost reminds me kind of like a slight mango-y flavor with a citrusy kind of flavor too, and that kind of Tamarillo tomatoey sort of in the mix. Really, really tasty. And it's quite surprising that these ones are not really on supermarket shelves, but these ones are, so definitely is worth growing your own. And as for this one here, I had a bit of an idea because they look a little bit like testicles. I'm gonna call this Tamarillos for testicles, but basically I thought I could auction this online to raise money for testicular cancer. cancer. So I will leave a link below to that listing if you guys want to partake or check it out. And the proceeds from that will be donated to a testicular cancer charity. But it is also Men's Health Week coming up this June. So I'm going to leave some links below for you guys out there who want to learn how to do a self-examination and things to look out for when it comes to testicular health. So yeah, do check that out and share it with anyone else who it applies to. Hopefully I can keep my Tamarillo trees alive this winter, and I'll probably just throw some frost cloth roughly over them on those really cold nights just to help out a little bit. But don't forget to check out the link below if you'd like to get your hands on these. And if you want to grow a different type of fruit that's more hardy and even more prolific than these, then check out this video over here all about feed jars, because those are an incredibly delicious fruit and I'm sure you'd love to grow them. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.